The scanner on my wrist beeped once, and then went silent, and that silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. I am Vela Ashrin, daughter of the Ashen Reach, and I had just been rejected for the 112th time. The male standing across from me, a broad silver-skinned trader named Corin, did not even bother to look ashamed. He simply glanced at the small device on his wrist, saw that it gave him no reading, and turned away without another word. His footsteps echoed down the metal corridor of the trade platform, and I stood there alone under the flickering lights, feeling smaller than I had ever felt before. My people call it the resonance. It is a signal buried deep inside every one of us, something our bodies release without our control, something that tells another person whether we are meant for each other. It is supposed to be beautiful. It is supposed to be certain. For everyone else, it works exactly the way it should. For me, it says nothing at all. The healers on my homeworld called it a flaw in my blood. My mother called it a curse on our family name. The council called it a reason to send me away before I turned 30 cycles old. Because an unmarked woman past that age becomes a burden that no clan wants to carry. I had 4 months left. I walked through the lower market of the platform that evening with my head down, trying to ignore the whispers that followed me everywhere I went. A woman with no signal. A woman no one could want. I had heard every version of it so many times that the words no longer even stung. They just sat inside my chest, like a heavy stone I had learned to carry. That was when I nearly walked straight into him. He was crouched beside a broken vent panel, sleeves pushed up, hands covered in grease, muttering something under his breath about a stubborn valve that refused to seal. He looked up at me with surprise, then smiled like I had not just interrupted his work. "Sorry about that," he said. "I didn't hear you coming." I stepped back, startled that he had spoken to me at all, without first checking his wrist device. Most people did that automatically now, a habit so deep they barely noticed themselves doing it. He had not even glanced at his own arm. "You are in my way," I said, more sharply than I meant to. "Yeah, probably," he said, standing up and wiping his hands on a cloth. "Name's Callan. I fix things down here. Mostly air systems, sometimes people's tempers." I did not answer him. I simply walked past, and I thought that would be the end of it. It was not. 3 days later I saw him again in the platform's dining hall, sitting alone at a corner table with a plate of food he was barely touching. The hall was loud that night, full of traders and travelers from a dozen different worlds, and I had nowhere else to sit, because every other table fell silent whenever I approached. So I sat across from him instead, mostly out of exhaustion. "Rough day?" he asked. "Rough life," I said, before I could stop myself. He did not press for details the way most people would have. He simply nodded and let the silence sit between us for a while, comfortable instead of awkward. Eventually I found myself telling him everything, the resonance that never worked, the rejections that piled up year after year, the deadline hanging over my head like a blade waiting to fall. He listened to all of it without once looking at his wrist. "That sounds exhausting," he said finally, "being judged by a machine before anyone even gets the chance to know you." "It is not judgment," I told him. "It is truth. The resonance does not lie." "Maybe not," he said, "but it also doesn't ask any questions. Where I come from, we don't have anything like that. We just meet someone, and then we decide, every single day, whether we still want to be around them." I remember laughing at that, a short, bitter sound. "That sounds like chaos." "Maybe," he said, smiling, "but it also means nobody gets left out just because a machine didn't like their signal." I did not understand what he meant that night, not fully. I understood it 4 weeks later, when the summons arrived early. My family had grown tired of waiting. They had petitioned the council to move up my transfer to the far station reserved for unmarked women, a place where we would live out our days serving others, stripped of our names and our futures. Worse, a senior official named Doran Vashek had submitted a claim to bond with me before that transfer could happen, not because he wanted me, but because bonding with an unmarked woman before her exile would let him seize control of my family's holdings without resistance. I found Callan in the docking bay that night, staring out at the stars through a viewport, and I told him everything in a rush of panic I could not control. "They are sending me away," I said, "and Doran wants to use me first, just to take what belongs to my bloodline. I have no way to refuse him. Under our law, only another bonding claim can override his, and no one on this entire platform carries the signal for me." Callan turned to face me slowly, and I saw something shift behind his eyes, a kind of quiet resolve I did not expect from someone who fixed vents for a living. "I'll do it," he said. I stared at him. "Do what?" "Submit a claim," he said, "against his." "You do not understand what you are saying," I told him, my voice rising with fear now instead of anger. "A claim from an outsider, without a verified signal, is considered an insult to the entire bonding right. My people will see it as blasphemy. Doran will not simply accept the humiliation of losing to a man his scanner cannot even read. He has the authority to demand a formal challenge, and formal challenges on my homeworld are not gentle. People have died defending a claim far less controversial than this one." "I know," Callan said quietly. "I've heard the story since I got assigned to this platform. I know what I'd be walking into." "Then why would you offer it?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering, and when he did, his voice was steady in a way that made my chest ache. "Because somebody should get to choose you, Vila. Not a machine, not a bloodline, not some official trying to steal what isn't his. Somebody should actually choose you. I'd rather stand next to you and lose everything than watch you get dragged away because nobody ever gave you the option." I did not sleep that night. I lay awake turning his words over and over, terrified for him and terrified for myself, and somewhere beneath all that fear was something else I had never felt before, something warm and unfamiliar that I did not yet have a name for. 3 days later, we stood before the council chamber on the platform, a room built from cold steel and colder tradition, filled with witnesses who had gathered simply to see the spectacle of an outsider making a fool of himself. Doran stood across from us in his ceremonial armor, arms crossed, a thin smile on his face that told me he expected this to be easy. "You bring a human," Doran said, his voice dripping with amusement as it echoed through the chamber. "A man whose own body cannot even produce a signal for the scanner to read. This is not a challenge. This is an embarrassment." The council elder lifted the scanning device and pressed it against Callan's wrist without much ceremony, clearly expecting nothing. The device blinked, searched, and returned no reading at all, exactly as Doran had predicted. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the chamber. "You see," Doran said, spreading his arms wide, "even your own machine rejects him. This confirms everything the council already knows about her. No signal will ever answer for either of them." Callan did not back away. He stepped forward instead, closer to the scanning device, closer to Doran, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Run it again," he said. "But this time, don't just scan me. Watch her face while you do it." The elder hesitated, glancing toward the council leader for permission, and after a long pause, received a small nod. The device rose again, pressed against Callan's wrist, and once more returned nothing. But this time, everyone in that chamber watched me instead of the machine, and what they saw was not disappointment on my face. It was something closer to hope, something none of them had ever seen from an unmarked woman before, because no one had ever bothered to look. Callan turned toward the council leader, his voice calm but firm enough to fill the entire room. "Your device measures one thing. It cannot measure everything. It was never built to understand people like me, and maybe it was never built to fully understand people like her either. That does not mean nothing exists between us. It just means your law only ever learned to read one kind of language." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Doran opened his mouth to argue, but the council leader raised a hand, silencing him before he could speak. "The law recognizes bonding claims," the leader said slowly. choosing each word with care. But it does not require the scanner's approval to validate a choice freely made between two willing individuals. It has simply never been tested this way before. Doran's face twisted with fury. You cannot be serious. You would let some outsider walk in here and undo generations of tradition based on nothing but words? Tradition exists to protect our people, the leader answered evenly. Not to trap them. If she chooses him freely, and he chooses her freely, then the challenge stands, regardless of what the scanner says. Every eye in the room turned toward me then, waiting. I looked at Callan, at the steady calm in his eyes, at the man who had walked into a room full of people ready to mock him, simply because he believed I deserved the chance to choose for myself. I thought of 112 rejections, 112 silent machines, 112 doors that closed without anyone ever asking me what I wanted. I choose him, I said, and my voice did not shake at all. Doran stormed out of the chamber that day, stripped of his claim and his dignity, in front of the very witnesses he had gathered to watch me fail. My family did not speak to me for a long time afterward, uncertain of what to make of a daughter who had broken tradition and somehow walked away stronger for it. Callan and I stayed on that platform for another year, fixing broken vents together, and slowly building something that no scanner could ever have predicted. We argued sometimes, and we laughed more often than that, and every single day, exactly the way he had once described to me, we simply chose each other again. No machine ever gave us permission. We never needed one.